What's up, Psychedelic Spotlight podcast? It's your boy James here from the Psychedelic Investor. Today we have an absolutely fantastic treat for y'all, and that's because we are interviewing the one, the only Doug Drysdale, CEO of CYBN, who, by the way, just won the Company of the Year at the Microdose Wonderland Awards last night. So it is an absolute pleasure to allow all of you guys to finally meet Mr. Doug Drysdale. Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, James. Really good to see you.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So first, right off the bat, let's get right into it. What is the vision of CYBN?
You know, we've always had a vision to turn psychedelics into therapeutics, and that sounds simple, but it's really quite complex. If it was simple, these powerful molecules would be medicines already for decades ago. So it's quite a challenge, and that's really what we've been doing to optimize the power in the psychedelics and turn them into therapeutics that can be used for the masses, for hundreds of millions of people that are suffering from mental health disorders.
Yeah, because hundreds of millions of people are suffering. Like when you look at PTSD, when you look at depression, anxiety, the list goes on. There's so much unmet need out there, so much suffering that is happening, that if our thesis that psychedelics can help turns out to be true, then we can help these people. And you, being the leader of a leading psychedelic medicines company, can help these people. So I guess off the bat, I'd like to say thank you almost for your service type of thing. Thank you for doing your part to try to make the world a little bit of a better place.
You know, it's really exciting. And I've been in pharmaceuticals for 30 years, and part of the reason for doing that is to help people, but I don't think at any point in my career have I had an opportunity to help so many people in such a meaningful way. It really is transformative what we're working on. So
let's pull on that thread a little bit. What made you personally, and for background for people that might not know, like you said, you worked in the pharma industry before, so what was it that made you want to make the leap into leading a psychedelic medicines company? Because I could understand how that could be construed as risky from a personal perspective, going into something so cutting edge. So what was the driving force behind your personal decision to get involved in psychedelics?
A big part of it was just that, though, that opportunity to make such a big difference. And there was so much evidence, this sort of foundation of scientific evidence out there already. So although there's some risk, as there always is in drug development, the evidence is so compelling. But then, you know, like everyone else that works at CYBN and almost everyone we know, I have a personal story. I have personal sort of family and friends and loved ones that have suffered from depression, addiction, suicides. It's all around us.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate. Hopefully we can build a better world together. But you talked about some of the data here. So your company is working mostly on psilocybin and then derivatives of psilocybin. We'll get to those in a moment, but let's start with the big one, psilocybin. What is some of this data, some of this evidence that you're talking about that shows that it could be helpful to heal people?
So great data today from the Compass study, by the way, indicating that, confirming that psilocybin has really powerful efficacy. What we announced yesterday was data around our CYB3 program, which is a deuterated analog of psilocybin. So we're taking the benefits of psilocybin and we're modifying the molecule in order to create a better experience for patients.
So before we get into the CYB003, let's try to segue in a little bit. Let's start talking about, so psilocybin itself has lots of potential benefits, but as you point out and your company points out, it also has some strong negatives or some limiting factors behind it. So what would some of those limiting factors be?
Yeah, the limiting factors are that it's very long-acting. When you look at some animal data we presented, oral psilocybin at 4 hours, at 4 hours post-dosing is still going strong. So patients have a very, very long duration, and that means whole days in the clinic, 8-hour clinic days. And now I think that some patients might be willing to make that investment, that time investment, but it's not really just about the patient, it's about the payers and the providers and the infrastructure that's needed. Makes the whole process really quite expensive.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say it's not only a time investment, it's a monetary investment too, especially if it's not covered by your health care. And if you're paying a therapist for 8 hours to watch over you, that's very expensive for people that aren't necessarily from money. So in order to scale up this kind of treatment to everybody, that time really is a limiting factor. The fact that you need to pay somebody to watch over you in a clinic for like 8 hours or upwards of 8 hours. So we got the time. What else are problems with classical psilocybin?
Well, another issue is variability. So, and we've known this for a couple of decades that people react differently to psilocybin. You know, one individual might have a mild effect, and another individual might have a very profound effect on the same dose. And that's because of psilocybin's a prodrug, and it is metabolized into psilocin. And we all have different metabolisms.
Mind just giving a very quick definition of what a prodrug is for anybody who might not be aware?
Yeah, it's really an agent that is then converted into the active drug. So psilocybin doesn't work as a psychedelic. Psilocin works as a psychedelic, and psilocybin is converted to psilocin in the body. And that conversion varies between you and me and everybody else. But when you're creating a therapeutic, you really want it to be consistent and have very narrow levels of variability so you can have a predictable response. It's challenging for physicians if they don't know how you're going to respond.
So just to give a personal example of what you're talking about, a few years ago I was in Amsterdam where it's legal, government authorities who might be watching, and me and some friends took some psilocybin, some truffles there. And my friends were just vibing, having a good time, and I was like on the floor having a bad trip, like rolling around. It was affecting me much more than it was affecting everybody else. So I can understand how in a therapeutic setting, that could be an issue. So we got the long duration effect, we got the variability of effect, how it affects some people much more than other people. Any other issues with psilocybin?
It takes quite a long time to kick in as well, an hour and a quarter maybe for peak effect. And I don't know, if you're having a treatment for the first time and you may be a little anxious about it, that's probably a long hour that you're waiting. So I think, and also of course that adds to the overall clinic time. So if we can reduce the time of onset, if we can reduce it to total duration, if we can reduce that variability, make it a very efficient treatment, but still keep all the powerful benefits, then I think we really have a therapeutic that we can make really accessible. And at the end of the day, I'm talking about the molecule, but this is really about patients. And our goal, as I said at the beginning, is to try and make these treatments as accessible as possible. And I believe that comes from getting broad reimbursement. And this profile that we're talking about, I think, leads to a higher level of reimbursement and therefore more access for patients.
What do you mean by reimbursement?
Well, at some point, somebody's got to pay for these treatments.
Okay.
A government, an insurance company. It's not likely to be the individual in most cases. Look, if you're wealthy, you can fly off to a retreat today and have these experiences for yourself. But most people can't do that. So let's make these treatments as accessible as we can.
Fantastic. So we have 3 core issues with psilocybin as treatment today. Long duration effect, the amount of time it takes to kick in, and then the variability in effect. Now you guys have a nifty little molecule called 003, CYB003. How does it work to kind of mitigate some of these effects? Does it lessen the duration effect?
It does. The duration and the molecule that we've tweaked leads to 2 times faster onset, so half the time to get to peak effect.
Okay, and I'm just going to get you to check my science knowledge here. When a molecule is deuterated, I believe that means you're adding a hydrogen molecule to it, right? To either make it like heavier or lighter. You're changing the composition of it with a hydrogen molecule?
We're actually taking off a hydrogen.
Taking off a hydrogen.
Or 2 or 3 or 4, and we're replacing the hydrogens with deuterium.
Okay, see, I was almost right. I would failed my chemistry test, but I was almost right.
You're almost right. Deuterium is heavy hydrogen.
Okay,
right.
okay.
And the deuterium has a number of effects on the molecule. It helps with metabolic stability, so that reduces that variability. It helps with bioavailability. So that means that when you take these substances orally, much more of it gets into your bloodstream. And it also helps with brain penetration. So we can get higher levels or the same levels in the brain, therapeutic levels in the brain, for lower levels in the plasma. And what that translates into is perhaps we expect that the dosing for our products will more likely be in the 5 to 10 milligram range versus 25 milligrams for psilocybin. And many patients experience nausea with psilocybin, and that's because of the peripheral psilocybin in the bloodstream. So we can reduce that with a lower dose, lower side effects.
Okay. So CYB003, if it works, has a shorter duration of effect, it has less variability, and it has a quicker onset action. So it is kind of counteracting the 3 main issues that we have with psilocybin. Where are we right now in the process of actually getting this to patients?
Making lots of progress, actually. In our total programs, we've run 74 preclinical studies in the last year. It's a phenomenal amount. We've got about 10 left to go with CYB3. all of them are ongoing and in process, so we'll be done with those in the first quarter of 2022. And that means filing an IND or a CTA with the FDA, and we'll also go in the UK, first of all, in the second quarter of next year.
And that would be for a phase 1 safety trial in humans?
Absolutely, which we expect to start right after that in the UK and the US.
Okay, so in these animal models that you've been doing it originally on, we've seen no indication that we'll see any sort of adverse events that we don't see in psilocybin. It looks equally as safe as psilocybin.
It looks equally as safe as psilocybin. We've seen the same toxicology and the same receptor binding, the same activity. So no differences there, just change the profile of it as it comes in and out of the body, basically.
Okay, so phase 1 trials next year. I know that the FDA process to get through phase 1, 2, and 3 is a very long process. Kind of optimistic scenario, what are we looking at here? 5 years, would you say?
Yeah, I think 5 years is a reasonable estimate, but it's hard to say because many things can affect that. We might see great results and we might end up with a fast track status. We might have opportunities to run parallel studies. We will see. Nobody knows at this stage what FDA or other regulators are going to ask for at the phase 3 level. But now that Compass has published their data, I think we'll probably get some idea of what FDA is expecting.
Do you ever worry about any sort of backsliding when it comes to regulatory approval of psychedelics, or do you think that the industry as a whole has essentially reached escape velocity, and assuming the trials show positive data, we're good to go? You don't worry about any sort of political interference at any time?
No, I don't.
You think
I don't
reached
actually.
escape velocity
I do think we have, and
Okay.
I think that the efficacy data is so compelling. I think we can manage the side effect profile, so these these molecules are safe, and I think that FDA has already put their cards on the table by granting breakthrough therapy status. I think that says to me that FDA believes in these, or believes in the potential, and now it's up to us to turn them into therapeutics.
Okay, that's fantastic. So I know it's only been done in animal models, so it might be a little bit difficult to speak to this, but if somebody were to take CYB003 as opposed to regular psilocybin, would the subjective effects be the same other than the duration of effect and onset of action?
We would expect so.
You would expect so.
There are models that show a psychedelic effect, and we've seen the psychedelic effect, as we would expect, because the root of the molecule is psilocybin. So we wouldn't expect anything different. How that translates into therapeutic effect is exactly why we have to do human studies. And it's the same reason that we're having to do studies with psilocybin. It's the same thing. But I think we're in a unique situation where there's already good human data out there. Johns Hopkins, NYU, these studies, although they're not FDA studies, they are well-run clinical studies that give us a pretty good indication that these treatments work. And the animal models that we've been running on the blood profiles, if you like, the speed of onset and the duration, translate very well into humans. There's very good translation. So yeah, we're very optimistic.
So how does this compare and contrast CYB003, I mean, with your other molecule, which is a deuterated tryptamine, the CYB004? What would be the key differences, in your opinion?
Well, the starting molecule is a different tryptamine.
Okay.
So it's not psilocybin. We haven't announced what it is yet. It's a very short-acting tryptamine, which has quite a different profile to start with. It's quite a sharp ride, if you like. That again is therapeutically challenging. How do you dose that in a clinical setting? So the deuteration again there helps to smooth that out.
Okay.
So, excuse me. So we can go from a rocket ride to more of a cruise ship ride. But we're still in process there. We're about a quarter behind CYB3.
Okay. So what do you think are the near-term catalysts, both for Cybin and the wider industry as a whole?
Well, I do think this psilocybin data from Compass is going to be well received for anyone that's working with tryptamines, and I think we'll see good response, and maybe that'll lead to broader interest from the general public and from investors. So good validation. For us, we've got completion of our preclinical studies and IND filings early next year, and I think that's really good validation of all the work that we've been doing, and we're excited to get into human trials next year.
And you are also planning on starting sometime next year a phase 2 trial for your CYB001, right? Or that's been put on hold because we're focusing more on CYB003.
Yeah, so this is something that people need to understand about drug development is that many companies work on multiple paths to the same goal. You'll see big pharma run several phase 1 studies and pick the candidate that is most likely to go forward, because phase 2 studies and phase 3 studies are expensive. Exactly. So you want your best shot at an approval. So we've been working on CYB1, CYB2, and CYB3
and just
all at the same time.
Right. Just for clarification, CYB001 is a much more traditional psilocybin molecule as opposed to 003, which is modified in more ways, correct?
It is correct. CYB1 and 2 are both psilocybin, but we've changed the formulation. We've changed how we deliver them into the body. CYB3 is a tweaked molecule. We changed the molecule itself. And we found by looking at all three, we've had great learnings from all three. And CYB1 hits some boxes, CYB2 checks some boxes, CYB3 checks all the boxes. And so that's where we're going to invest our time. It's also, from a cost point of view and efficiency point of view, better to be investing in 2 programs, so alcohol use disorder and major depressive disorder, with 1 molecule.
Okay.
When you're developing 2 molecules side by side, the whole safety program is duplicated. Now we can do 1 safety program, which is probably a $20 million, maybe a $30 million saving over the course of drug development. It's meaningful.
So the answer there was mostly focusing on 003 going forward. We got great data from 001 and 2 that can influence the choices that are being made for 003, but that's the main molecule going forward.
I like to think of it in terms of patients. We're focusing on depressive patients and alcohol use disorder patients, and we're doing that by progressing CYB3 for them instead of 3 programs.
Perfect, fantastic. So let's say, let's put on our little optimistic hats here for a second. Let's say 003 goes well in human clinical trials. Where do you see Cybin as a company in like 5, 6, 7 years? Do you see yourselves as a company that has their own therapists that are providing the care itself, or do you see yourself as more a pharmaceutical company that's providing the drugs to clinics across the world, essentially?
That's a good question. So we see ourselves as primarily a pharmaceutical company, but a modern-day pharmaceutical company that provides support to the ecosystem around it. So we don't intend to employ our own therapists, but we have created a psychotherapy program in order to train therapists. It's called Embark. And our goal is to make Embark open source so that any therapist that wants training can get training on it. So that's one aspect of supporting the molecules. The other is clinical partnerships. We formed 1 partnership so far with Greenbrook TMS. They have 149 depression clinics across the US. And I think what we're showing there is that we don't necessarily need to build our own clinics. We can partner with thousands of clinics around the world and give them the support they need. And Embark is part of that support. And then the last piece is digital therapeutics. And we're working on some things internally. But I think it's inevitable that patients and providers are looking for digital tools to sew the whole ecosystem together, track their progress, et cetera. So the molecules are at the core of it all, but with other services around it.
Fantastic. So for my last question here, I actually have a nifty little deck to ask people that I'm interviewing questions. They're random, fun questions. It was actually made by Empath Ventures, a fund created by my friend Brahm. So we're just going to go ahead, give this a little shuffle. And hopefully we get a good question and not a corny question. So you want to pick a card, any card, bring out my inner magician here.
Now this is concerning, but okay, we can do this.
Okay,
I'll let
what
you
do we
read
got
it.
here?
There you go.
So, what are some potential negative outcomes of the mainstreaming of psychedelics? Do you think there are any?
Well, I do think we need to be careful, and we need to develop these treatments with respect and with care so that we have the best possible outcomes. I think that there are so many people that need these treatments and many people that want these treatments to become available. If we don't develop these treatments respectfully and carefully, we may end up with some bad experiences that then put the whole sector back. And
do you ever worry that one bad apple might ruin the whole bunch?
You know, I was worried about that. You know, when I first started in the sector, I was concerned about some of the activities that were going on. But I really feel over the last year that the sector has become much more professional, and I think we're moving in the right direction.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. Again, if people want to learn about your company, where can they find you, essentially?
CYBN.com.
CYBN.com. You heard it there, folks. Well, thank you again, Doug, for this interview. I had a lot of fun.
Me too. Thanks very much.